and welcome to Rising. Thank you for joining us on this Wednesday. We are T-minus 1 day to Thanksgiving.
We are nearly at the turkey, Robby. It is all good.
The turkey is coming, looming on the horizon. But we've got some more news to get to first, don't we?
We do indeed. And before we get into all of that, we want to know, Robby, what is on your radar?
Well, Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign team is speaking out and blaming everyone but themselves for the candidate's poor performance in the presidential election. Senior campaign officials Stephanie Cutter, David Plouffe, Quentin Folks, and Jen O'Malley-Dillon appeared on Pod Save America to explain what they think went wrong and why Harris made the strategic decisions that she did. In an answer to the question of why Harris didn't do more media appearances, the campaign's explanation was that those interviews with mainstream journalists were a waste of time because the questions were of poor quality. Take a look.
I would say, I mean, look, I am not media hater by any measure, and I think that, you know, we women don't get far in life talking about double standards, so that's not the point. But I do think a narrative, 107 days, 2 weeks up because of a hurricane, 2 weeks talking about how she didn't do interviews, which, you know, she was doing plenty, but we were doing in our own way. We had to, you know, be the nominee, had to find a running mate and do a rollout. I mean, there was all these things that you kind of want to factor in, but real people heard in some way that we were not going to have interviews, which was both not true and also so counter to any kind of standard that was put on Trump that I think that was a problem. And then on top of that, we would do an interview, and to Stephanie's point, the questions were small and processy and about like
dumb.
They were not informing a voter who was trying to listen to learn more or to understand. And I'm not here to say that you know, the whole system was focused on us incorrectly. I'm just saying, like, again, of the things we need to explore as we move forward as a campaign and as a country, that does a disservice to voters. And, you know, I think back and think we should have signaled more of our strategy early on about podcasts and who we were trying to reach. But we had a limited amount of time to reach the people we were trying to reach, and we were trying to go to them. But being up against a narrative that we weren't doing anything or we were afraid to have interviews is completely bullshit, and also like took hold a little bit. And we just gave us another thing we had to fight back for that Trump never had to worry about.
Wow. Let's be clear. Kamala Harris got the same kind of questions, the exact same kind of questions about her record, her positions, and what she would do if she became president. Same deal as any previous candidate. This was not a sexist double standard. O'Malley-Dillon tried to infer. Republican vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance, for instance, was grilled just as harshly, more harshly, much more harshly, by the mainstream media when he did interviews. And because he did a good job with his responses, he managed to improve his favorability ratings over time. The problem with Kamala Harris wasn't the questions she got, it was the answers she gave. They failed to win over the American people. But the campaign officials are right that more interviews with mainstream journalists was not going to accomplish the task of introducing Harris as a potentially compelling figure to the kinds of voters she needed to win over. For that, they did in fact need a podcast strategy. Here's Team Harris explaining at long last why the Joe Rogan interview, from their perspective, never took place, or at least sort of explaining it. Let's watch.
Should Kamala Harris have gone on Rogan? Can you just, not to be tedious about it, could you talk a little bit about how close she came to doing it, why it didn't happen?
Yeah, there's a lot of intrigue around this, a lot of theories. It's pretty simple. We wanted to do it. I hate to repeat this over and over, but it was a very short race with a limited number of days. And for a candidate to leave the battleground to go to Houston, which is a day off the playing field in the battleground, getting that timing right is really important. So we had discussions with Joe Rogan's team. They were great. They wanted us to come on. We wanted to come on. We tried to get a date to make it work, and ultimately we just weren't able to find a date. We did go to Houston, and she gave a great speech at an amazing event.
The Beyonce event?
Yes. Well, I'm going to call it Reproductive Freedom.
Stephanie Cutter goes on to explain that Harris's visit to Houston, Texas, just happened to coincide with Trump's appearance on Rogan, so they couldn't make it work. Now, Rogan lives in Austin rather than Houston. In any case, in lieu of the Rogan experience, the Kamala campaign spent 6 figures moving the set for the Call Her Daddy podcast to Washington, D.C. Mediaite points out that that interview still has fewer than 1 million views on YouTube. Trump's interview with Rogan has more than 50 million. Great strategy. There are rising videos that crack 1 million every now and then. We're beating out interview with the sitting vice president at the time. So lots of chatter going on about this interview, where they seem to, first of all, there's the blaming the media, which, when Trump attacks the media, it's an attack on our democracy and our liberal values, but when liberal Democratic operatives do it, I guess it's fine. The whining about the questions she got, there was no sexist double standard there. I guess I hear the point that Trump didn't do a tremendous number of sit-down cable news interviews in the window that Kamala was the alternate candidate, although he's done tons of interviews over the course of his seeking office so many times. So I don't think it's quite the same thing. Kamala Harris has never done this as the presidential candidate. So that wasn't the same thing. And then to claim that the questions were process-oriented or what were not designed to, I don't even know what they meant by that. It's clear that people were interested in those questions about what she knew about Biden's mental state, her changing political positions, why she had not gotten immigration, improved that situation as the kind of person in charge of that, and so on.
So let me point out something where I do think there was a double standard, which was specifically within the topic that you're talking about. Trump at one point had agreed to go on 60 Minutes and then pulled the plug, decided he wasn't going to do that. I do think that they are right in suggesting that if Harris had done that, pulled away from a big sort of prestige broadcast interview, that there would have been very strong criticism of her dodging questions and so on and so forth. That didn't really happen in relation to Trump. He did decide to go on lots of podcasts. Those were generally pretty friendly conversations, as was the Joe Rogan podcast with him. You and I spoke before about Kamala Harris not doing that. I think she should have done it. They were making the argument about logistics and time off the battlefield. The broader issue, as you say, there's a lot to talk about in this in the episode that we just played some excerpts from. One thing that struck me was just how many different explanations one or other of the Harris aides offered. I have a whole little spider diagram here in my notes. So
he does have it. It's pretty cool looking.
So the atmosphere was pretty brutal, according to David Plouffe. There were only 107 days, according to Jen O'Malley-Dillon. The trans ad that Trump ran had some kind of effect. The price of eggs was too high, also according to Plouffe. Double standards, Steph Cutter, we have said before. And Democrats eat their own, Quentin Fulks said. I'm not sure exactly what he meant by that. There was no mention of a failure to tap into a desire for change in the country, that at least I heard. No mention of Trump's inroads into working class voters. No mention, I tweeted last night, there was no mention at all of Gaza or Palestinians or Israel,
amazing.
Which I think was just an incredible oversight. I'm not saying that that was the reason why she lost, but to just ignore it seems ludicrous to me. And there was no real even hint of contrition from any of those people that we may have got anything wrong.
Yeah, it sounds like their standpoint is basically, look, we had 3 months, we came in at the last minute, we were in a bad situation, everybody did the best we could, and we fell short. Which is not, it's not completely wrong to see it that way, because they were in a difficult position that Joe Biden got them into by deciding to run again and then suffering a massive backsliding in terms of his fitness. That said, as you just pointed out, the people hungering for change could not have indicated more clearly that they wanted a break with the last 4 years. And Kamala Harris, when given the opportunity to distinguish herself, said, no, there's nothing I would have done differently.
One of the really
That's
telling
the fatal
moments
mistake
in the campaign.
Yeah,
not great.
Well, we've got more to say about this interview, and also Kamala Harris speaks, sort of, for the first time since her loss. We're going to talk about that coming up next on Rising.
Vice President Kamala Harris spoke out for the first time since conceding the presidential race to Donald Trump. Here's a clip of Harris talking to some of her supporters.
And it means so much to me and to Governor Walz that you knocked on doors, you called friends, you called in favors. You said, hey, I showed up at your softball game. Now I need you to show up at the campaign office. You put in the time. It was personal for you. And you gave all that you could to support our campaign. Because of your efforts, get this, we raised an historic $1.4 billion, almost $1.5 billion. Again, I'll say, the election didn't turn out like we wanted it to. Certainly not as we planned for it to. But understand that the work we put into it was about empowering people. That's the spirit with the work we did. I just have to remind you, don't you ever let anybody take your power from you. You have the same power that you did before November 5th. And you have the same purpose that you did. And you have the same ability to engage and inspire. So don't ever let anybody or any circumstance take your power from you.
Social media users skewered Harris's 3-week post-law speech. Frequent critic of the Biden administration, Benny Johnson, posted on X, quote, Kamala Harris addresses supporters 3 weeks after a humiliating loss to Trump in painfully cringe 10-minute rant where she brags about wasting over $1.4 billion in donor money. And conservative pundit Gunther Eagleman wrote, who in their right mind let Kamala Harris post this? Lol. Charlie Kirk, host of The Charlie Kirk Show, chimed in as well, as Kamala delivers a message to her dejected supporters, bragging about how they raised nearly $1.5 billion for her failed campaign. David Plouffe has finally admitted the campaign's internal polling never had Harris ahead of Trump. It was all a giant scam. Niall,
Yes.
what are your thoughts of that video? She's, I don't know. Can I say it? Can I express
we're
my
not censored around here.
it's and it's fine, and she lost, and she should be
Sure.
taking some time off and relaxing with a bottle of Chardonnay or whatever puts her in a calming place. I wonder if she had cracked into that bottle before posting that message.
I know there was some comment to that effect online. I think she has a rather idiosyncratic way of speaking at the best of times. It seemed, I wasn't clear whether her remarks there were scripted or not, because they seemed at times quite casual, but it would be odd if you gave a fairly lengthy address for the first time since she considered the election.
I agree.
Without any notes
It
at all.
seemed unscripted, but I can't imagine that it was.
Whether it may have been or not, I do first have to defend her to some extent with, like, I mean, we read out tweets by, like, Benny Johnson and Charlie Kirk and that other guy.
Yeah.
Like,
your best friends. Your pals.
all my besties. I mean, these, they would criticize Kamala Harris for breathing, so right. I don't know really what is particularly gained other than
woke breathing.
Well, maybe it is. Look, on what I don't really think, I don't want to kick her when she's done,
yes.
so to speak. She ran, as is often the case with Kamala Harris. Wasn't the best, wasn't the worst, it was okay, it wasn't enough to overcome all the difficulties that she faced. That speech was not her at her most effective. I will certainly acknowledge that. I think it was sort of very vague. One of the things I notice about Kamala Harris' speeches generally is she doesn't really tend to tell a story in the speeches. There isn't a narrative. Maybe she'd just get a new speechwriter. There isn't a narrative really in her remarks. There's sort of a bit of this and a bit of that, and throw it all into a grab bag together. Having said that, look, losing a presidential election, we've spoken about this before, very searing experience, very exhausting experience. I think it's ludicrous to say it was a scam because everyone needs vast amounts of money to contest a presidential election.
I mean,
anyway.
Losing like the student council treasury election in middle school is traumatizing enough.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just coming this close.
Are we going back to your youthful traumas here, Robby?
Exactly.
I mean, it all comes down. I often think back when the whole Biden crisis was ongoing, there was some otherwise anonymous X user who went very viral for a tweet that, if I remember it correctly, was simply, they're going to have to roll the dice on Kamala, bro. And that was basically the situation. Like, Biden was definitely going to lose.
Yeah.
Jumping past Harris to someone else wasn't really viable because she's the incumbent black female vice president. she has political flaws, as we all saw in 2020. Some of the things she did this campaign were okay, some of them were not so good.
Well, and they're still talking about her. She wants to keep herself in a conversation for now, as we alluded to yesterday or the day before,
Right.
in contention for either California governor or running for president again. I can't imagine her actually doing either of those things. Look, I think if she ran for governor of California, she would very well win. She would have a good, strong chance of winning. She has name ID specifically in California, and is her kind of, as you say, idiosyncratic, not just deliberately, but mix of policies or what she stands for, is clearly a fit for California. I have no doubt she could win that race. I have serious doubts about her necessarily winning the nomination or the presidency if she pursued it for national politics. She could become governor. Does she really want to do that? Does she want to do any of these things that take work? And look, she did her best. I don't want to kick her when she's down either. I think she should, semi-retire from well, certainly from running campaigns. She can be a speaker or do whatever, book tours, that kind of thing. That's really the role for her. That's got to be what she wants more, is less taxing and to be tapped again.
And as we said whenever we previously discussed this, it's traditionally difficult in American politics to come back from defeats. Now, obviously, Trump is a rebuttal to that argument, but you go past that and you have to struggle to find people. Nixon did it, admittedly, in the 60s.
Nixon was the biggest political comeback until Donald Trump.
Right. But, that is generally rare, and if you lose a presidential election, there is not generally an easy route back from there. And it's not like Kamala Harris has a really, it's not like an AOC type figure or a Bernie Sanders type figure where there is a ideological movement that is filled with fervent believers in that person. She's a sort of technocrat, really, whenever it comes down to it, and those people do not tend to inspire massive loyalty. Right,
and she's someone who I think wanted to be in the mold of like a Barack Obama, as such a charismatic someone whose personality and personal charisma holds your attention, that it doesn't even really matter the substance of the things he would say mattered less, or what the policies were mattered less. And progressives and liberals have been debating since the inception of Obama whether he's a person of the left, or whether he's really a centrist, or what his views actually are, how they've changed, because he certainly was a very, very stridently progressive person earlier on. But none of that really mattered, because it was the vibe, it was the feel of him, before we used the word vibe so frequently to describe everything going on. That's what she wanted to be, but she just doesn't have that raw talent,
doesn't,
which is not an uncommon thing. Barack Obama was unique in that category for being such an effective deliverer of rhetoric and speech.
That's what I was actually going to say, a version of that. I think that Democrats have become spoiled to a degree in saying that various candidates are no Obama, and I think that underestimates what an exceptional political figure Barack Obama was. I know, conservative members of our audience will be fuming about that such a remark, but separating him out from whatever you think of his ideological positions, he's an extraordinarily talented person.
Well, and I would say Reagan was as well, in terms of the communications and the delivery of speeches, and of course, but both of their political careers now look far less impressive next to Donald Trump. Returned from the dead to win the presidency.
Don't try me this close to Thanksgiving.
I'm not even saying it in a it's a good thing sort of way. You just have to observe the phenomenon. It is remarkable. I have Niall grunting and grimacing, but we've got lots more to talk about on Rising today. Please stay with us. President-elect Donald Trump signaled Tuesday that he would put a 25% tariff on all imports from Canada, Mexico, and 10% on China, stoking fears that a trade war could be upon us. Trump blames his tariff threat on the influx of undocumented migrants and fentanyl coming through the borders. He maintains imposing import taxes will lead to more factory jobs, shrink the deficit, lower food prices, and allow government to subsidize childcare. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau weighed in on Tuesday. Here he is talking to reporters.
Good call with Donald Trump last night again. We obviously talked about laying out the facts, talking about how the intense and effective connections between our two countries flow back and forth. We talked about some of the challenges that we can work on together. It was a good call. This is something that we can do, laying out the facts, moving forward in constructive ways. This is a relationship that we know takes a certain amount of working on, and that's what we'll do. One of the really important things is that we be all pulling together on this. The Team Canada approach is what works. That's where, putting aside partisanship, that's where I reached out immediately to Doug Ford to agree with him that we would have a First Ministers meeting this week to talk about the United States. Talked with François Legault and some other premiers as well. There's work to do, but we know how to do it.
Economists are skeptical as Trump's tariffs could upend the 2018 USMCA free trade deal that his administration helped craft. Plus, they say relying on tariffs is an inefficient way for governments to raise money. Tariffs may be geared in other directions, but critics warn against the unintended effects on US consumers. Grocery bills could rise as the price of produce would go up. Overall, when combined, Canada and Mexico make up 52.6% of agricultural imports that come into the United States, 69.5% of oil and gas, and 49.7% of transportation equipment. Speaking in a press conference Tuesday, newly minted Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum vowed to stop migrant caravans from reaching the US border. On the issue of drugs, she contended that that's a US problem to deal with. And in response to Trump's threat of tariffs, Sheinbaum suggested that Mexico could retaliate with tariffs of its own.
Social media users reacted. Economist Douglas Boneparth posted, quote, "I'm going to buy a whole bunch of avocados and tequila before Trump tariffs Mexico, flip them, and make myself an easy 25% return." Liberal X account Art Candy posted, quote, "Things are about to get a lot more expensive. Bravo, mouth breathers." And Batya Angar Sargan said, "Trump hitting the ground running with a promise of 25% blanket tariff on Mexico and Canada for their failure to enforce the border on their side and a 10% tariff on China over fentanyl. Absolutely epic stuff. This is what Americans elected him to do, and it's still just November." So this is very interesting. I think most people should be able to agree that ideally we don't want to have tariffs. It is pretty incontrovertible that it raises the price of goods at a time where that is the number one concern of all Americans, the high price of what they pay for groceries, what they pay for products. This is going to make things more expensive across the board also because, if component resources become more expensive for firms that manufacture them or manufacture things that need those components, they just raise the price and pass that on to you, the consumer. So we definitely don't want to have tariffs. I think what people in Trump world who are defending this approach the most honestly, who do know that, I saw commentary from the incoming Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, on this. The point is to induce different behavior from these other countries, from Mexico, Canada, and China. We're not really going to get different behavior from China, but maybe from Mexico and Canada. And so it's being used as a diplomatic tool, not that we're actually going to do them. Of course, if they believe we would never actually do them, then it doesn't really work as a diplomatic tool. Right. But what's your take?
So my take is that this is already, having immediate effects in that we saw instantly on the stock market the big automakers, to your point about component parts, Ford, GM, and what used to be Chrysler and is now Stellantis, falling quite sharply. Immediately these tariffs were announced or proposed by Trump. And that's a byproduct of the fact that if you put tariffs on Mexico in particular, and Canada to a degree, where they get a lot of their car parts and so forth, it would drive up their prices. And there has been research done by a group called Wolf Research that suggests that a 25% tariff on those nations would raise the average car price for Americans by $3,000. Now, that is not a good thing. It looks like we've got tariffs on our lights, because I think some just went out there. But in any
They're
event,
motion censoring.
Yeah, exactly. There's something happening. People are... Anyway, beyond all of that, the problem is that there is an immediate negative impact, even if this is just a threat. And as you point out, if it is just a threat and is perceived as just a threat, it doesn't actually work because people don't think there will be follow-through.
Right.
The threat relies upon the possibility that there will be follow-through. And if there is follow-through, as I think you and I both agree, that would have detrimental effects on American consumers and spur inflation.
Right, and this is not some liberal criticism of Trump. Being suspicious of tariffs and pro-markets has been a Republican position for a long time. I was listening to Rand Paul talking about it on CBS over the weekend, and he's saying that, yes, we don't want to have tariffs. He's, in fact, tried to put forth legislation to maybe remind the president that it is Congress's job to make law and the president to carry it out. And so the declaration of tariffs should not be done by executive fiat anyway. It should be done by Congress.
Although he does have the power to do it, I believe, for national security.
This would restore it to Congress. Well, yeah. Oh, we have the power to do everything for national security.
Right, I know. No, I mean, I'm not defending it. I think it's skeptical of it,
Yes.
but anyway, yeah.
Yes. So ideally, we don't want to have them. We don't want to make things more expensive. We don't want to make it inefficient to produce goods, to provide services. And then if we tariff them and they tariff us, so, this is just like blowing up bridges or deciding to make things more expensive for no reason, or creating work. It creates some category of jobs or extra work for some people, which is good. But we're not all workers in one specific field. We're all consumers in a large economy. So you don't want to require that, to build a house you have to you have to jog in circle for 5 miles before you do it. That would create more work, but it would just make the price of everything more expensive. It just creates inefficiency for no reason. Right. So we don't want to do this. So I'm hoping this can be used just as a negotiating tactic and not actually something that gets imposed. I
wonder if the concept that you just described was sufficiently covered by the media during the campaign. We often criticize the quote-unquote mainstream media from other perspectives here, but the tariffs issue, there seems such widespread agreement that tariffs are fundamentally a bad idea. And yes, I know Trump imposed some limited tariffs in his first term, and I know that Biden didn't get rid of them all.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
But this is not what Trump is talking here about 25% on all goods from Canada and Mexico, and adding 10% to already existing tariffs.
Right.
So, I mean, that from China. So that is, I think, very problematic regardless of one's ideological position.
I mean, I agree with you, but I think the Canada and Mexico ones seem much more likely to be just negotiating tactics and not going to be implemented. And with the China one, which might actually go into effect because we're not going to get China to do anything differently, is more just kind of a continuation and in line with what Biden already did on this front. That is a shame from my political vantage point, but there has been much more continuity on this aspect of policy than just about anything else between Trump to Biden and now to Trump again. I think Democrats, it would be difficult, I think. I mean, you can disagree with me if you want. I think it would be hard for them to run on, or would have been hard for Kamala Harris to run on, no, tariffs are bad, we're totally against them, when their administration was for that. I mean, that could have been a way she distinguished herself from Biden, if given that she said, you know what, that I would have agreed. That would have appealed to me as a swing voter if she said, yeah, the tariffs that Biden did are economically destructive, and we know those raise the price of things, and that was a mistake, and I don't want to do them, and we're going to have less tariffs. And under Trump, you will have tariffs, and you will pay more in prices. That would have been an appealing message.
I think what Democrats would argue is there's a difference between targeted tariffs, which do, in fact, still have an effect, and there's all sorts of issues where China retaliated, and did that hurt, soybean farmers in Iowa. But in any event, there's a difference between targeted tariffs and blanket tariffs, which tend to have counterproductive impacts on the overall economy.
Well, I know I'm stocking up on tequila just because that's what I do every weekend. Lots more to come on Rising
more news
soon. Please pay attention. I'll be delivering speeches with the cadence of Kamala Harris soon enough. If we keep this up, stay tuned.
A ceasefire between Israel and militant group Hezbollah has gone into effect, and residents are returning to southern Lebanon, an area heavily bombarded by the Israeli military. The truce calls for a 2-month halt in fighting to begin with, and it requires Hezbollah to end its armed presence in most of southern Lebanon. Meanwhile, Israeli troops would return to their side of the border, according to the Associated Press.
The deal does not address the war in Gaza. Hamas has called for a ceasefire following the Lebanon agreement. Joining us now to discuss is Simone Ledeen, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East under President Trump. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So what are we to make of this ceasefire deal being in place? I think so many Americans want to see a greater peace in the Middle East, want to see greater safety and security for Israel. Is this a kind of thing that is good for that country, given all of its military conflicts going on right now?
Well, I think it would be better to look at this as more of a tactical pause than a long-term ceasefire. In fact, the agreement was for 60 days, and it's not a coincidence that President Trump gets sworn in 53 days. So, first of all, I just want to make that clear. It's more of a tactical pause than an actual cessation of hostilities. And there were many reasons for this. But of course, peace is good, but I just don't see this as a lasting peace, unfortunately.
And in relation to your comment about it being a tactical pause, let's just flesh that out a little bit. I mean, of course, everyone watching will have their own view of the underlying conflict, but when you say a tactical pause, what are the motivations for either side to have a temporary pause rather than a longer cessation?
Well, neither side has really achieved its stated desired outcomes from this conflict. So on the Israeli side, I believe if I were a decision maker over there, I would take this opportunity to have the fighters rest, refit, rearm. They were in drastic need of rearmament, and the United States was withholding a lot of the weapons that Israel needs to complete this war and to achieve the victory that it needs, driving Hezbollah out of southern Lebanon per the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701, driving Hezbollah north and away from the Israeli border. On the Hezbollah side, they stated a while ago that they were not going to stop their hostilities until they were helping Hamas with its war against Israel. In fact, signing this agreement means that they have backed away from that goal. They have not achieved that goal, and yet they have agreed to a ceasefire, at least a temporary one. So it's clear that Hezbollah is back on its heels. And I believe just like Israel is, they will take the opportunity to rest their fight, allow their fighters to rest and to refit and rearm themselves. Although a lot of their rockets and larger weapons caches have been destroyed by Israel.
What do you expect Trump to do when he gets into office with respect to not just Israel and Lebanon, but Israel and Gaza? You know, the Gaza issue has been something that clearly divided Democrats, that hurt Joe Biden among some of his base, the perception that he was being too deferential to Israel and to Netanyahu. But of course, Republicans remain, and Trump has been extremely supportive of Israel and Netanyahu in the past, while still recognizing that this is an unpopular issue on the Democratic side. And there are some Republicans, clearly Republican voters, who want the U.S. to be less involved in the Middle East to the whatever extent possible. What kind of difference, or is it more of a continuity, do you expect we're going to see with respect to Donald Trump and Israel policy?
Well, the best way for America to stay out of these conflicts is for us to stand back from this aggressive stance of preventing armaments to get to Israel. Israel can finish this. We just need to step back and allow them to do that. The faster Israel wins this war, and it will win, the faster Israel wins this war, the faster we can move forward with a new Middle East, a peaceful Middle East, rebuilding the Middle East and helping the Lebanese people, the Gazan civilians. That's what we all want to see. So withholding armaments, making threats to Israel regarding the UN and different like the International Criminal Court, this just draws this out and actually has been leading to some of these humanitarian issues that we've been seeing. So I believe the best way forward, and I know that the incoming Trump administration, they've already made several statements to this effect. they're going to take the handcuffs off Israel in terms of withholding armaments, in terms of making threats in the United Nations, and allowing Israel to do what it needs to do in this war of self-defense, to push back these Iranian-backed terrorist threats and allow them to achieve this victory. And again, this frees up the United States to focus on what we need to do, which is outside of the Middle East in the long term.
Let me push back, or at least give a contrary view there, Simone, to some of the arguments you were making and some of the language you were using. You were saying, for example, that it was important that the United States stand back from what is going on there. But I mean, the United States has supplied about $18 billion in military aid to Israel already. It is not, the standing back would surely involve, if one wanted to stand back, one would be reducing the amount of military aid to Israel. And you also said about Israel having the handcuffs removed, or that President-elect Trump would remove the handcuffs. I mean, they've killed more than 40,000 Palestinians and more than 3,000 Lebanese. Not much evidence that handcuffs have been placed on them in the first place, is there?
Well, I disagree with your characterization, and I disagree with the number that you just threw out, which is a number that is provided by Hamas, hardly an impartial arbiter of life and death in this. I think it's important to note that Hamas, in fact, built its weapons factories, housed its fighters within civilian populations in order to maximize civilian casualties. And so and again, this was an attack against Israel on October 7th that Israel has been reacting to ever since, a horrific attack. So I think it's important to note that. And so yeah, I disagree with your characterization of this. And when I say handcuffs, what I mean is the continued slow walking of armaments to Israel from the United States. I think there's some real specific demonstrated examples of this, and it's been ongoing. And this was the reason why Israel had to come back to the negotiating table. They really had no choice, but also because they need these armaments now. Again, I think it is cruel to extend the conflict into X number of years. I think the kindest way to fight this war, which this is a war that is happening now. It's not some pie in the sky idea for the future. It's happening today. So I think the most important thing to do is win this and allow our close ally Israel to win this defensive war. And what we need to do in order to allow them to do that is to provide them the armaments that they need to complete their mission, to achieve victory over these terrorists, and to allow the Lebanese people, the Gazan people, the Israeli people to flourish as we know they want to do.
Simone Ledeen, thank you for coming on to share that perspective with our viewers. We appreciate it. Elon Musk is getting involved in a legal issue involving Alex Jones. Elon has filed a limited objection to The Onion's bid to purchase Alex Jones's news service. The billionaire and ex-owner says that he has superior ownership over the outlet's accounts on Musk's platform.
The satirical news site The Onion originally won the bid to purchase Infowars, including, of course, its social media accounts. But that sale was halted by a judge for further review. A new hearing has been scheduled to hear more about The Onion's bid, and the judge is saying that he must approve the sale.
Now, Musk is arguing that X users do not own their accounts, only the content they post on it, and social media is in a tizzy over it. One user saying users don't own their X accounts even after paying for them, and another saying X trying to block the sale of Infowars account to The Onion is the exact opposite of free speech.
Now, this isn't the first time that Musk has seized accounts for his own purposes. Back in October, he took over the America handle on X to use for his super PAC that was supporting President-elect Trump.
This is interesting, but I think I completely agree with Elon Musk, and probably it's even clearer from a legal perspective that what people think they own their Twitter accounts. It's owned by Twitter.
Well, I mean, if that is the legal status, that is the legal status.
Yeah, you don't
but,
have any, you know.
Well, I mean, if Elon decided he would seize Robby Soave or at Robby Soave, not you in physical person, would you not have a grievance about that?
Well, I'd be upset about it, but I think he's totally within his rights to do that. It's his website. It's you're renting the service.
But I mean, if it were literally your name personally, surely you have rights to the use of your own name.
I have
do you
right
not?
to the use of my name, but it's not the. I mean, it's like he can't represent himself as. I mean, this gets into some interesting philosophical internet territory. He can't represent himself as Robby Soave, but.
Right.
The domain, the Twitter handle at Robby Soave, what is owned by, just like my account with Comcast, where I pay a monthly fee and they give me internet service, it's not really owned by me. It's just me paying for their service. Like, right? I have a specific package of television channels I want to watch, but it's not. It's their service, and Twitter is their service, and we pay for it. Since you pay, if you are paying for it, not everyone even pays for it, but if you are paying for it, you know, you're entitled to whatever the contract says it is. I'm sure if you read the fine print, it's very generous to the company.
Ever.
I mean, it's the company's technology. It's ephemeral, so it's hard to define what we're even describing here. But
so this is interesting because we do not typically discuss any of these topics that we talk about on air before we do it here. And I was curious as to what you would think. And I thought you would be much more tortured than you are about Elon seizing what appears to be people's personal intellectual property in some sort of philosophical sense, regardless of what the fine print of the X terms of use say.
If you start posting stuff in the comments on a website, you don't have any. They can just delete your comment at will if they want. How's it different from that?
But isn't the deletion of a comment different from saying, I, Elon Musk, as the proprietor of X, will now take control over the handle at Robby Soave, at Niall, Stanage, or whatever? That seems to me a kind of erosion of personal rights, really.
I mean, again, if he seizes my account and starts tweeting from it in a way that is like representing me, that could be fraud, I think, of a kind. But I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I think that people have become accustomed to the idea that, of course, everyone understands social media accounts can be suspended or banned or whatever. But I do think that that feels a bit different to me than the proprietor just saying, "Well, I'll take that account now, or I'll take that handle."
But again, because it's ephemeral, like, what are you owning here? Like, the intellectual property argument works both ways, because you have a right to. The account itself is an impersonation of you, right? It's you impersonating you, but you can manipulate what the photo looks like. You can describe yourself however you want. You can also do what was I going to say? Like and additionally, it's not like you own. And this comes up with data, with online data, because the social media company is learning things about your behavior, right? It's learning what websites you visit in order to sell you more efficient ads, in order to place ads more effectively to make money. So it has this information about your preferences that we get really upset about the idea of that information being leaked or being traded. But again, that's it's almost like a dossier they're compiling on you. Because of they're doing reporting on you. Why would you own that information? Like, if I started making a list of the attributes of Niall Stanage, and how can you own the notes I'm taking of you? They're my observations about you, which is what the social media site is doing, albeit vastly and far more effectively and efficiently.
Yes, but I mean, I just think that's a different thing, Robby. Like,
it's kind of dystopian, I guess.
When I get on the subway, the metro here in DC, now I do it with an app on my phone. Obviously, the metro authority can tell, oh, he got on at that station, he got off at that station. I don't think that I really own that information. That is information that they acquire. But I just think that is different from like a billionaire on one of the biggest social media sites in the world saying, you may have this handle that is under your name, but I own it, so tough. I'll just take it now.
Well, and of course, what was actually happening here is that a judge has ordered Alex Jones to hand over there was a legal action, the judge has paused it, but there's a legal action to have all of Alex Jones' possessions transferred to the winner of a auction bidding, which was The Onion, the satire news site. And so they were asserting a right to take possessions also of Alex Jones' Twitter account.
Right.
And Elon is saying, it's not really so much saying that you can't do that because that belongs to Alex Jones, because if it belongs to Alex Jones, it's going to The Onion. It's Elon coming here and saying, no, that belongs to me.
I know.
So some media property is getting Alex Jones' handle regardless, and it's not going to be Alex Jones, is my point.
Yeah.
I think it's very philosophically and legally interesting, but I would absolutely end up on the side where, again, it's in the, you don't have to use this service.
Yeah.
It's somebody made a really good, artistic rendering of you, or complete with like a hologram of you. Does it belong to you? I don't know.
I don't think it's the same thing, Robby.
Well, it's not exactly the same thing.
But I do think when it comes to Elon Musk and Alex Jones, to repurpose that old Henry Kissinger phrase about the Iran-Iraq war, for me, it's a shame that both sides can't lose. But there we go.
Our producers are telling me that it works for Amazon too. When you buy a movie, you don't actually own it under the fine print. If you buy it on Amazon, they still own it.
That seems unfair. This is the danger of corporations, Robby. We need you to stand up for
Like if you
individual
lose your account, you no longer would have access to it because the account doesn't belong to you.
I don't know. I think I seem to be on the side of individualism
so.
here, and you seem to be on the side of the corporate.
No, I'm on the side of property ownership, and I'm skeptical. I'm very skeptical of intellectual property, but it's in all directions here, because it's not. I would be skeptical that you couldn't make another, if they tried to say you can't make another one, this same account on another platform because we own this kind of exact thing, I would say, well, that's nonsense.
Right.
But because it's their platform and their technology and it's owned ultimately by Elon Musk, I have to say it's his, not yours. And he gets to set the terms by which you use it. Now, we're free to complain about those terms because I do criticize the moderation at social media companies all the time, especially when it's done at the behest of the government. If the government came in and started saying, whose accounts are what, then I would be very fussy about it. But that's not what's going on here.
We shall agree to disagree.
Fascinating subject. Let us know what you think about this. It's kind of not a clear one, so I'd be interested to hear from you. And we've got more Rising coming up right after this. Los Angeles is the newest sanctuary city. The city council recently voted to stop the use of local police resources to enforce deportations. President-elect Donald Trump is making the removal of undocumented immigrants a priority on day one. Trump said he would ask Congress to pass a law outlawing sanctuary cities across the country.
Some of those cities include New York, here in Washington, D.C., Chicago, Boston, and San Francisco. Now, the law would not stop the government from carrying out mass deportations in Los Angeles, but the new measure does signal that local officials are standing with its substantial immigrant population.
One user on X wrote, 100% fine with arresting the LA City Council for harboring illegal aliens. We do not want LA as a sanctuary city. Another wrote, Boston's mayor has vowed to fight deportations. LA's mayor pushed its sanctuary city ordinance. Denver's mayor says he will go to jail to protect illegals. Imagine if they fought this hard for their actual constituents. This seems to me like totally misreading the political moment we're in, where immigration was the number one concern, immigration, inflation, number one concern of voters. The desire to do something about illegal immigration is very, very strong. There is a consensus around that among the people, not, I don't think, to deport every last illegal immigrant in this country. I don't think, I personally don't want to hassle otherwise law-abiding Americans who are working and contributing meaningfully to American society, but certainly to begin with those who have who have engaged in other criminal behavior, to do something there, and not running a city and voting to decide to not have the local police assist in those efforts seems politically bad for the Democrats.
So I take your point about the politics. Let me just speak up a little bit in defense of part of the theory of sanctuary cities, because that's a label that gets sort of thrown around, and generally speaking thrown around derisively. At its core, which LA did what I'm about to describe back in 1979, I believe, there was an ordinance that essentially said the police shouldn't ask people what their immigration status is. And the underlying principle, I think, does make sense in that if someone who is undocumented sees someone being assaulted or sees a property being burglarized or sees another crime taking place, you do not want to give a significant disincentive to that person reporting the crime. And I think that that in itself makes very solid sense. It is in the greater good of the society that people who have information about violent crime feel at liberty to report that crime or say what they know to police without facing deportation. Now, firstly, I take your point that the political mood around immigration is very restrictive or conservative or whatever you want to call it. And I also wonder whether within what I have just described, are there exceptions made or not? For example, when an illegal immigrant is convicted of a serious crime, it seems to me just as a moral matter that person who is convicted should then lose the sanctuary, as it were, that the local authorities should be at liberty to say, you know, person X who has now been convicted of assault is in fact here illegally, so, you know, what do you want to do about that? ICE. That doesn't seem unjust to me, but I see the practical argument for the wider idea.
Yeah, look, in terms of asking people about their immigration status, I agree with you. I don't think the police should, as a matter of habit, ask that question. I certainly don't think they should stop people for no reason and start, I mean, they shouldn't stop people for no reason, period.
Right.
But stop people for no reason and say, oh, what's your immigration status? Absolutely not. I don't think that should be a part of just like a routine interaction with police to bring that up. If they if they grab someone for otherwise, you know, making vandalize, you know, shoplifting at CVS, even something as light as that, then I think it's okay to ask your immigration status then. I would not have a problem with that. In terms of the other thing about the sanctuary city stuff, I think this probably frustrates a lot of people and a lot of people on the right that, okay, we've been told immigration is a national issue, it's a federal policy, right? There have been court cases to stop Texas, for instance,
right,
and Arizona from having policies that are harsher than the federal government policy because, sorry, even though you guys are border states, this is a federal issue. So if conservatives don't get to do that and have harsher policies on the border, why do liberal-run cities get to decide, oh no, we're going to do our own little mini immigration kingdom here?
That is a very valid point, and I'm not even sure what the standard liberal argument is against that. It is true that in the case of Texas or conservative border states, it is always said that it's not your kind of bailiwick, it's not within your jurisdiction. It is for the government in Washington to make that decision. I would, I suppose, defend in one way the LA issue, which passed unanimously in the Los Angeles City Council. So, you know, if you want a different policy, elect different members of the council, I suppose. Yeah. And the other point is just in terms of differences, demographic differences in different cities and states and localities. According to one of the council members who voted for this, 1 in 3 Angelenos is an immigrant and 1 in 10 is an undocumented immigrant. So obviously that is going to, a mass deportation, if it happened, would have a very, very traumatic effect on a city where that is the makeup.
Yeah, and I don't want mass deportation to take place, and I think we have to be very careful about emboldening some kind of police state, especially like a national or federal police state. Again, I go to Rand Paul, who's the person in Congress most similar to my own political views, saying that totally in support of using ICE and FBI, et cetera, to deport people for otherwise criminal behavior, but we don't want to have the optics of sending the military into cities. That's one reason why you would want participation and assistance from local police who, at least theoretically, would know the local landscape or scene better than some distant federal agent. They might know how to approach, you know, a housing community or something where maybe there's a lot of undocumented people, but there's one in particular who's been accused of some serious crime that we want the police to go talk to that person and their immigration status. And it might be better if the local cops might have more local knowledge about how to do that in a way that doesn't escalate things or cause other problems.
So to that very point, and linking it to the national picture, there has been a suggestion from some people in sort of Trump's vicinity, I think Stephen Miller, that if certain states which have Democratic governors refuse to use the National Guard for deportations, they would sort of import National Guard troops from Republican states. That just seems to me a terrible idea. Whatever you think of the underlying policy, to have, for example, Massachusetts, where Governor Maura Healey has said she would not facilitate any deportations, to the idea that you would then, you know, get the National Guard from Mississippi to go to Massachusetts and to help with deportation seems a very, very bad idea to me.
Good discussion. Lots more to come still on Rising. Stay tuned. Americans are very uninformed about reality. It's not coming from me. That's coming from Alec Baldwin. The 66-year-old actor received a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Torino Film Festival in northern Italy, where he commented on the recent U.S. presidential elections. Let's watch.
In my country, without going into significant detail, half the people in the country are happy, and half the people in the country are very unhappy. It's a very difficult time in the United States.
Alec Baldwin also said this about the American mainstream media and misinformation. Let's watch.
What's happening, you might not learn from the news. Television news in the United States is a business. They have to make money. And again, not to go into great detail about that, but there's a hole, there's a vacuum. There is a gap, if you will, in information for Americans. Americans are very uninformed about reality, what's really going on with climate change, Ukraine, Israel, you name it, all the biggest topics in the world. Americans have an appetite for a little bit of information. That vacuum is filled by the film industry, not just the independent film industry, not just the documentary film industry, which are very important around the world.
His political declaration received some backlash on social media. One ex-user writing, quote, "We know not to point guns at people." Another ex-user posting, "Pretty certain that I speak for a few 100 million people when I say, F that guy, he hasn't lived our reality in decades. And funny how the elites in the world are so intelligent and we the people are just ignorant. At least we know how to aim," unquote. Reference to the shooting of someone on the set of the film that he was directing. The armorer on set was prosecuted for that accident that took place, for some really serious seeming negligence in that case. I'm not the most like rah rah woo patriotism type, or sometimes not that I'm against that, but I find that a little, whatever, cringe. But, Alec Baldwin going to northern Italy to bash America, just stay there, Alec. Just enjoy Italy. Fine. Have fun there. Don't come back. You don't like it here so much. You think your fellow Americans are idiots. We don't need you.
Let me speak up for Europe then, from this side of the thing.
We'll take good Europeans.
Thank you. You allowed me to stay for the moment.
Yes.
Look, the thing here is, I know that people get riled up because it's Alec Baldwin, and of course people know generally...
You are useless, Alec Baldwin!
We were discussing our mutual love for Team America World Police before we got to this point. The thing is, the argument that he's making in some ways is quite a common argument among the sort of new right as well, which is basically that American news is driven by corporate profiteering, that it conceals the real truth about... I mean, he mentioned Ukraine, for example, which was an unusual topic for Alec Baldwin to cite, because normally the criticism of the coverage of Ukraine is that it's sort of too favourable to the Biden-type position. So I did think it was interesting that he cited that. And so he's expressing his scepticism largely of media coverage, which is seemingly a fairly widely shared scepticism.
Yeah, and this is what gets me about this. So he makes this blanket assertion that Americans are dumb or dumber than other people, uninformed. But then he cites, for examples of mass people being misinformed en masse, he cites, one of the things he cites, Ukraine is a complicated geopolitical issue where there is, again, this is the smug Hollywood liberal approach. There can be no debate or discussion or disagreement on it. What many in the mainstream media have asserted is the existential stakes and what led to it, and the sole fault being on Russia is, I think, a incomplete picture and is not an example of you being misinformed if you have questions about, again, questions that now the military experts themselves share about the likelihood that Ukraine can prevail. What exactly am I supposed to be misinformed about? It's very unlike the climate change example, where I know what he's going for, which is that although, again, there's a complicated political battle, disagreement about how best to mitigate the harms of climate change without causing additional harm or harms that is worse than the harms associated with climate change. There is not real across-the-board wholesale denial that the climate is in fact changing and human activity has contributed to it and perhaps worsened it more dramatically in recent weeks. That's not a particularly controversial thing to say, I don't think.
Oh, well, I'm not.
I can't see the polling on it.
I don't think Trump fully accepts what you just said, does he?
I think he does. I think most Republicans do. Again, the
I
argument
thought his
is over.
argument was it wasn't it may be changing, but it wasn't man-made. No.
Well, I think there's a debate over. I mean, the climate does. We went through an ice age before man contributed anything to the changing climate. Climate does change of its own accord, and some of the most out there predictions and projections for how effed the planet would be in a very short timetable, made by expert people who are taken very seriously at the time, particularly on the population crisis category, has just the Paul Ehrlich type people Malthus got a lot of that stuff wrong. So again, you can't just say, well, people are dumb and we have to always listen to the experts because the experts disagree and the experts get things wrong. And also, if you poll people on just like the rawest measure of intelligence over time, like intelligence quizzes, those kind of IQ quizzes, standardized test scores, those go up over time. Mm-hmm. The population is not getting stupider. This is not specifically true to America, just humans are not getting dumber in general. We are so focused on people being misinformed, misled by viral things on social media. People used to believe that if you butchered animals, the way their entrails spilled out predicted the future, right? People believed totally crazy, irrational, pseudo-religious, superstitious things. We are becoming a better educated people over time.
So let me speak up in defense of the Hollywood liberal elite here, Robby. I think that there is an issue that is separate from intelligence or stupidity, because his argument isn't actually the American people are stupid.
His argument is people aren't listening to him.
Is that they're uninformed. And there are lots of people of various different political standpoints or perspectives who would argue that the media coverage of very serious issues is not sufficient or adequate to inform the population. Now, I get that that argument often encompasses the idea of deliberate misinformation, which does exist, and disinformation or falsehood. I also get a little bit reflexively defensive when people, of course it is true that experts are or can be wrong. Nobody disputes that, but it is a logical fallacy to say because the experts are sometimes wrong, that means the non-experts are going to be right. I mean, sure. If you're concerned with infectious diseases, the person who has studied infectious diseases for 20 years at some higher institution of learning is much more likely to be right than your cousin twice removed on Facebook. So,
but there's also which experts phenomenon, because actually experts, many very credible people who study the spread of what's now called misinformation or the impact of information online. I've seen the studies, I've written about their results, I've talked about their results on the show. They often say that they'll actually, well, wait a minute, the spread of misinformation online is actually not as pervasive as you think, that abjectly false stories are glimpsed by a tiny fraction of people on social media, are reshared by a tiny, tiny group of mostly very old people. It is not the case that we as a society are routinely duped by these things, or that there's something new about being duped. I mean, think of media hoaxes or media getting things wrong going back even hundreds of years, going back to the Spanish-American War getting kicked off because of absolute lies about the situation printed in the leading newspapers of the time. So I take exception to the idea that this problem is worse than ever, has grown beyond human control, reflects some diminishment in human ability or intelligence that Alec Baldwin was getting at there.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, but I mean, I do think that if you look at the most recent election, for example, there was polling done on who accepted the objectively true fact that the stock market is at or close to all-time highs. A very significant proportion of people didn't believe that. Those people who didn't believe that tended to vote for Donald Trump, but that's a whole other matter. There is an issue where things that are objective facts are often contested on bad faith grounds in a way that erodes a common consensus on what the truth actually is. There are issues where that truth can be shaded or is debatable or is nuanced, but there are also things where...
Have you ever heard this concept from political science? It's called rational political ignorance. It's been very influential to my own thinking about democracy and elections. The theory is that people tend to be ignorant on political or politically related information, or even like statistics about how prevalent crime is or how much things cost, or things that are politically relevant information. People are ignorant about them, but they are rational to be so, because being highly educated or knowledgeable about these facts doesn't do you much good, because you have very little control over the political process. At the end of the day, you only have one vote. So it's the same reason why I'm ignorant about how to perform brain surgery, because I don't need to know how to perform brain surgery. I wouldn't be able to do anything with that information. It doesn't. I can't operationalize it into helping my life.
But in terms of deciding how to exercise your vote, it is surely in your interest.
But your vote is one of millions, and will not. Your vote in and of itself is extraordinarily unlikely to impact. And this is not my theory. This is what the theory says. Because your vote is so unlikely to impact the political process, you'd be wasting your time to become really intelligent about politics and then vote for the right person, because it doesn't have that much of an effect. So people don't. It's an indictment of democracy. It's a political theory for why democracy is not a great system.
Yeah, because the argument then is you're better just remaining ignorant and casting your vote on whatever pre-existing biases you have, essentially.
Yes.
That doesn't seem like a particularly fantastic note for the future of our republic, but there we go.
There we go. Tell us what you think about that. That does it for us today on Rising. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere that you can find podcasts. We will be back next week. Please enjoy your Thanksgiving, Happy Turkey Day, etc., and so forth. See you later.